ahead and begin. My name is Fred Lamphere, and welcome everyone here. And we have a really, really good program tonight. And the only thing I have to say here beyond that at the moment is an appeal for membership. If you have not purchased a membership for this year, for 2016, we invite you to do that. Our membership goes from the 1st of January till the 31st of December. Okay, so it's possible you could have bought a membership last December, but you still have to buy one for this year. And cost $10. It's a treasure.
Is it prorated, Fred?
Yeah, no. By age, you'd want it by age. Certainly not by income, because you could be paying a lot. I hope this is on the tape.
She's talking about Don Trump.
If you should buy a membership tonight, you just fill out a card, that's all it is, and put your email address on it, if you would please. We'll put it on the board, and we're going to keep these in this little can. And August 4th at the band concert, we're going to have a drawing, or quite a prize. And it'll be based on the people who've become members in the year. So thank you. I'm going to, that's all I have to say at this point. I'm going to introduce Jeannie Peterson. We're just going to say a couple of things. Jeannie Peterson, I'm sorry, I forgot, I meant to introduce our officers. I'll start on my right as the treasurer, Mike Pano, and Jeannie Peterson, the secretary. Right behind her is our corresponding secretary, Carol Russell. Beside her is the board member, Linda Paulson. Did I miss anything? I guess that's it. We have tonight. Okay. We're missing two members tonight. Grace Stevens is in Ottawa. I'd rather be in Ottawa than here tonight. And Anna Stark is working at the election over the school. So, G. Peterson, you have a couple words.
Well, I guess a recap is that we had a December concert in school. That was our last meeting. And then upcoming, we don't want anyone to miss out on the ice cream social. That will be August 4th at 7 o'clock, isn't it?
That's good. Thank you very much. That's the kind of report we like. We'll see you again in August. And Mike Pano, treasurer, give a report, a financial report.
I'll try to keep this brief. I'll give you a brief overview of the financial activity for this past year, 2015. In a nutshell, we started the year off January 1, 2015 with a little over $2,500 in the checkbook, and throughout the year we took in $7,700 and paid out $5,300. The $7,700 that we took in is more than is typical in any given year for a couple reasons. Number one, we were fortunate to receive a $2,000 request from the state of Charlotte Stafford. And secondly, we received double tax support payments from the village and the town, which is not usual. On an annual basis, the village gives us a tax payment of $1,000 and the town $500, and for whatever reason, whatever mix-up, their 2014, 2015 payments were paid in 2015. So we're not expecting that to happen. As far as expenses are concerned, a couple of the larger expenses the past year were we paid out $1,600 to NYSEG and a little over $2,300 for the new throws that we've purchased, but we'll be getting that money back plus more when we sell these. Other than that, we had numerous other bills under $500 for insurance, building maintenance, water, sewer, etc. So we ended the year with $4,900 in the checkbook. As of today, we still have a little over $4,000 in the account. So far for 2016, we haven't had any major expenses. They've been mostly utilities and insurance and building maintenance. So in addition to what's in the checkbook, we have just under $29,000 in other savings accounts and CDs. And I need to mention that we had one major expense last year that was paid outside of the checkbook. We had to replaced the roof at the depot. That was just under $14,000, and that was paid out of a $20,000 CD that we had set aside. It was given to us by Bob Ingersoll. So after we paid for that, we had $6,700 left over that's been reinvested and is part of the $29,000 that we have in savings. One last comment, one other highlight for this year, 2016, we received another bequest from the estate of Roland Harvey for $1,000. So we're very grateful for that. So we're in pretty good shape financially, and if anybody has any questions, I'll try to answer.
Thank you, Mike. Keep making reports like that. My appeal for membership, though, is we'd like to have more people involved, and also our budget this year, the 2016 budget, does show, if everything goes as we plan, that we will come up with $1,000 short, and that we would have to take $1,000 out of some savings to pay that. So if we could get 100 members at $10 a piece, that would solve that problem. Okay, so we'll be harping on it all year in the park, wherever we are there. We'll have that board, and we'll be trying to get people to pay come through with $10 memberships. Okay. Linda Paulson is going to tell you a little bit about Hannah Merrill. She was mentioned in the blurb for this program, and a lot of people in Oxford don't know who Hannah Merrill was. But she was a really exceptional person, and I'll let Linda speak for her.
Hannah Merrill was a daughter of Oxford, pretty and popular. She and her sisters attended Oxford Academy in the 1840s, which is probably why we don't remember much about it. The academy was just across the street from where our middle school now stands. She knew this building, or the library building, as a private residence. And she walked these sidewalks with their Oxford bluestone and walked in our lovely parks with which we are all so familiar. Definitely an Oxford girl. Theodore Ingersoll also attended the academy, but was about 6 years younger than Hannah. They may not have known each other, but then again, it's a small town, it's a small school, they may have. Soon after her graduation, Hannah had the dream of going south to Jackson, Mississippi, where her uncle, Sailor Judd, lived. She made the arduous journey as a 19-year-old girl and began teaching school. Then she met the love of her life, Evander McNair, whom she would marry in a large wedding in Oxford on August 10th, 1859. McNair would later become a general in the Confederate Army, and Hannah was very soon faced with a difficult choice. When the war came, Hannah made the loving choice of staying in the South with her husband. Anne Walker is Hannah's great-granddaughter and has written lovingly of her in the introduction to our completed Theodore Ingersoll diary, and books now are available. And Charlotte Stafford and Vicki House researched Hannah's life, and Vicki is with us this evening to answer any questions that you might have about her. We have tried to know this remarkable woman and her full life, and our Hannah should not be forgotten as we think of Oxford history.
She was story, and Vicki knows a lot about her, and Vicki was going to be here. That was her word, and so she was. Vicki House is sort of a protege of Charlotte Stafford, who was an incredible historian, and she, for the first time in generations, searched out the story on Hannah Merrill, and Vicki helped her as I say, sort of a protege, and she said she'd be here to answer questions, but if she shows up, good. If she doesn't, there's nobody else here who could answer those questions the way Vicki could. I could answer a couple, but it would have to be pretty easy. So. Bill Searfoss is here, and he was the point man and a real scout worker on transcribing 4 diaries that Ingersoll, that is Theodore Ingersoll, carried with him through the Civil War and brought back, and that were kept safely in his home. And it was a job that took, well, about 2 years and, on Bill's part. And then he and I went over on certain words and so on, and drank a lot of coffee, spent a lot of time in my kitchen, my place, and magnifying glass and everything. And then he went back and did it again, and because well, I'll let him tell you about the diary, and you'll get an idea of this man, Ingersoll, who was quite a man, and who, again, went to school right across the street, lived on a farm on Gospel Hill Road, and quite a career and quite a life. So I'll let Bill tell you about his diaries.
Okay. I can't do anything without written work. And yes, Fred, I kept it down to 4 minutes. Now, really, my association with Company K, 10th New York Cavalry, actually began at the Coventry Union Cemetery in Coventry, New York, when I petitioned for and received a replacement marker for Private Adney Russa, who was Company K, 10th New York Cavalry. He died at Aquia Creek of typhoid fever in May of 1863. Now, research on Russa would lead me to his father Levi and brother James, both of whom would enlist with Adney in the same unit during the late summer of 1862. What's more, I would find that his brother James had at one time owned the property where I now live. Now, further investigation of the same cemetery would reveal the names of Horace Tubbs, a saddler for the 10th, and Lieutenant Brunson Beardsley, mortally wounded at Middleburg during, I guess they would call it the Gettysburg campaign. It was in June of 1863. And his presence and wounding are noted in detail in the Ingersoll diary. So, needless to say, it was almost like serendipity when Fred Lanphier called me up one evening about 6 years ago and asked what I knew about the 10th Cav. And would I be interested in transcribing a set of diaries kept by the Quartermaster Sergeant of that unit during the American Civil War. Now, as it so happened, I was just laid up following joint replacement surgery, and finding time to do tedious transcription work was not a problem for me. 4 diaries were, for the most part, as T.J. Ingersoll had left them. Pages were stuck together if it had been raining during the entry times. Dirt and occasionally what looked like blood, and in retrospect I think it was probably more like tobacco stains, stained some of the pages here and there. The books themselves showed some wear from being carried, probably in a breast pocket, and in spite of their musty conditions, still carried the smells of tobacco and horse, tangible echoes of another time and place. I've always preferred to have my history firsthand whenever possible, and Ingersoll's accounts were all that and more. Here was a record kept by an articulate, well-read young man who wasn't trying to fool himself or anyone else. Events, names, places, and attitudes were all there in real time. In fact, this record is as close to real time as it gets for the American Civil War. His writing style said as much about the man as the moment he was experiencing. For example, his writing could and did reflect extreme fatigue, producing run-on sentences and at times nearly unintelligible scribbles. At other times, during long periods of inactivity and boredom, his writing was dull and unimaginative. It was almost mechanical in nature. And yet, at other times, during periods of intense activity and imminent peril, his writing becomes extremely vivid and to the point. Cold objectivity comes to the fore, and the details are laid out precisely as they are happening. T.J. Ingersoll is staying true to himself. What's more, his writing reflected his literary background at the Academy. He could and did produce some fairly decent poetry in his diary, and some of his entries suggest a background steeped in Gothic Romanticism. So, I decided that I shouldn't include any spoilers in any of this. So I decided to keep it general. You gotta read the book. So, to conclude, some may say that Ingersoll was something of an enigma. Here was a man who hated officers, office seekers, and politicians, yet he worked to put himself in a position of accountability and accounting. He helped make total war on an enemy that he couldn't help but feel real compassion for. He hated the war but stayed loyal to his friends and unit long after that war had ended. He couldn't wait to get back to civilian life, but worried that he might find home life too boring, too mundane, after what he'd been through. But through it all, he stayed true to his God and to his country. In short, T.G. Ingersoll had earned the right to bitch for reasons that most of us can't understand. And it's all here in the, did you bring those diaries, Fred? In those, the actual diaries?
No, I don't take them there.
Okay.
They don't go out of it.
Well, it's all there in those 4 little black books. And it's really quite a story from beginning to end. And that's it.
Thank you, Bill. Bill and I and about 4 or 5 other people have been involved with this. Could go on and on about that diary. It's very impressive. There are times I'm pretty unsentimental and hard male, but there are a couple places in that book it brings you right close to tears. I'll tell you. Yeah. That's how good he could write, and that's how dire his situation was at times. And there's sort of waves of experience through the book, and you see his whole attitude makes one big shift early in the war, and I won't give that away because it was known to quite a few Union soldiers. And then late in the war, he becomes as anti-war as a person can be.
Yeah.
And he doesn't come across as a extremely religious person, but he quotes the Bible here and there, and he's very, very convincing of his anti-war feeling by the end of the war. And, okay, we have a man who can go on about the diary and go on about the Civil War, go on about the experiences of cavalrymen. And this fellow's been in Oxford before. He's met some people here in Oxford, and he can speak. And I don't know just what he's going to say. He's not giving me any clue. But he's a great speaker, a great storyteller, and that's Doug Oakes. And we appreciate you coming over, Doug. So.
Thank you for the introduction. But, the truth is, I'm a good bullshitter. Don't go on with that. Basically, I've been asked to give an overall, a little bit of the 10th New York Cavalry, some of the life and times of the cavalrymen themselves. I picked up a few things out of this diary that reinforced some ideas and gave me some new ones. Most of my research has been in the infantry during the Civil War. And the reason I'm in regular attire, the only uniform from the Civil War that I don't have in my closet is the cavalry one. I can give you artillery, infantry, and engineers, but I cannot give you the cavalry. So basically, I'm going to give you a few facts and figures here, and then get into generalizations. Now, you get reading the book on Mr. Ingersoll, and you'll notice that he enlisted in 1862 with Company K. Believe it or not, there were companies before that that enlisted in 1861 and were actually in the field, or at least in the training, before Ingersoll and Company K and Company M actually got into the field, or actually even recruited. So anyway, the 10th New York, their nickname was the Porter Guard, and they were first organized December 12, 1861, and enlisted for 3 years. Company A was out of Syracuse. Company B through H was out of Elmira. Company I, K, and L also were recruited in Elmira, or that's where they were organized, in October of 62. And actually joined the regiment in December of 62. Company M was also in Elmira, from Elmira, and joined the unit in February. So you can see it sort of grew as it went along, which kind of caught me off guard, because usually they go as a unit. I've never seen one actually come up through this way as separate companies at separate times. Company K was recruited principally out of Oxford, McDonough, Coventry, Greene, Sherburne, Preston, and Unadilla. And this old man's got to put his glasses on. The first 8 companies were at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, from March to August in 1862. This was a training area. So actually, when the Battle of Gettysburg came around, a lot of these people knew the area well already because they'd been there for several months of training. Company K became a headquarters escort for the 2nd Corps, Infantry Corps, in September of '63, and later went on with the other jobs the cavalry would have. Total killed in action for the regiment was 5 officers, 71 enlisted men. Those that died of wounds were 4 officers, 26 enlisted men. Disease, 1 officer and 151 enlisted men. So you can see disease took a lot more than anybody else did. But that would be due to the weather conditions, how they had to live. A lot of it had to do with the food, and even more so the water. A lot of times, even the diary you've probably run across where they were drinking just muddy crap that they could find, and whatever was in it, was in it. And back then, it was nothing for the cavalry or the officers, whoever had their horses in the stream, upstream from you, and you were taking all your water and stuff for drinking purposes downstream. So all this came right on down. But nobody knew the difference, so they didn't really care. Now the cavalryman had a few more jobs than the infantry had. He had totally different kind of equipment. He had his saddle, bridle, the saddle blanket, all the accoutrements would have to go with the horse to take care of that. He had to take care of this horse because without the horse, he was basically infantry. So he had to have this with him. He had to maintain that thing as well as possible. Also, he had his uniform, which changed on and off. It was different than the infantry. It had the same colors to it, basically, except the stripes and all the piping would have been yellow. They more commonly wore a regular boot than the infantry did, although the cavalry also had the booties, just a short little boot, a shoe, basically. Their sidearms, from what I can tell from the diary, the 10th basically had the Remington revolver, which the Remingtons were made not too far from here in Lyman, New York. The big difference between the Remington and the Colt, the Remington had a top strap, like a modern day pistol. So the cylinder actually sat with a strap over top of it. But if you've seen the old Colts, the cylinder sits right out in the open. There's nothing over top of it. The only difference I have found, I think the Remington will take a beating more than the Colt will. But what happens with the Remington sometimes, at least I found it to happen with some that I've used, is after you've been firing a while, the cylinder will actually expand. And when it does, it'll jam. But I found out how to get rid of that, correct that, probably the same way they did. Instead of carrying 1 cylinder, you had a pouch with you, and you carried 2 or 3 cylinders already loaded in that bucket. So now, instead of sitting there and having to reload this revolver, you just pop the cylinder out, threw it to the side, threw a new one in there, and you're ready to go again. Otherwise, you can imagine being on a horse bouncing up and down and trying to pour the powder in this thing and then get the bullet in it. It ain't going to work. The other main staple, especially for the Union cavalry, was the saber. And if I thought of it, I brought one with me. But they used to call them wrist breakers, because while you were trying to train with these things, they were a heavy, long sword, and it took forever to build up the muscles in your wrist to actually use this thing the way it should be used. The Union cavalry used the saber a lot more than the Confederates did. The Confederates' mainstay was anything from revolvers to small sawed-off shotguns or a carbine. Because they get in close and they just start blazing away at you. But again, you got to reload them. The saber, you don't have to. Also, as the war progressed, what would change with the cavalry was the type of other sidearm they had, which was a carbine. The first carbines came out were usually a breech loader. It opened up one way or the other over the top. You'd throw in your round, which was the paper cartridge in the beginning, slam it shut, put your cap on, and fire, and you got one round with this bugger off. Then you had to go through the whole procedure again. They came out with several different styles of carbines like this, until eventually somebody got smart and came up with the Spencer and the Henry. The Henry would basically move more toward the infantry. The Spencer carbine would basically go with the cavalry. What was nice about the Spencer, and I believe you have one in the collection that
It's
came
beautiful shape, it's good. We don't, the actual stuff we don't take out of the building.
I don't blame you.
Sorry.
But what was nice about this, it was a lever action. And if I remember right, the Spencer loaded the stock.
Seven in the,
You'd open up the back of the stock, this tube would slide out, and you would put 7 rounds in there, put this tube back in and lock it in place, and it was a lever action. The Rebs would say you could load it on Sunday and fire all week. This made a big difference. A lot of times, the only drawback on the carbine was it was short range, but for cavalry was great. But if you got up against infantry with it, the infantry could start shooting at you that close to 100 yards out further than you could. But the best part of it was the added firepower. And it was small enough with the carbine that you could use it on a horse without a whole lot of hassle. You could just pick that thing up and just bring it up closer across the top of the arm when you're holding the reins, and bang, get your shot off, crank her down with the reins again, and bang, get the shot off. So it worked. It was actually better than the revolver, as far as that went. This was one of the things that really helped the Union cavalry start to move on in the war, and not only match, but overdo the Confederate cavalry. In the first part of the war, the Union cavalry was getting its nose busted every time it went into the field. 2 reasons. Most of these people had never ridden a horse before in their lives. You got a bunch of city people, small town folk. I mean, you didn't go a lot of pleasure riding. You saddled up, you used the buggy someplace to go, so you weren't really riding around fancy on a horse. Where the Southerner, a lot of them, especially the upper class, were always out prancing around on their horses and stuff, and they were quite good at horseback riding. Another thing was the tactics. The Confederates started changing tactics faster than the Union did. The Confederacy started setting up the cavalry as a separate unit that could go out and make raids and perform duties on their own. The Union used them mainly as camp guards, messengers, maybe out a little bit for scouting here and there and around places, but they were always attached to some other unit in the Army, so they were basically controlled. They couldn't really get out and do their job. It wasn't until '63 when a guy by the name of Pleasanton took over the cavalry. He had some good points about him and he had more bad points, but one of the good points was he started to organize the cavalry so it could work as an independent arm. And once it did that, it started to show itself as a good arm of the military. And the first time that it really showed itself as being equal was Brandy Station, which is mentioned in here. I don't know if he made the raid. I think he missed that one. He did miss Brandy Station, I remember it. But the 10th was there. Him himself wasn't there, but the 10th was there, and the 10th got involved. Instead of going over at Beverly Ford, they went down to Kelly Ford and came in, so they came in the later part of the battle. But most of their fight was around Fleetwood Hill. And they actually got up on top of the hill into the Confederate positions until they got chased back off. But the Union cavalry at that battle, for the first time, truly locked horns with the Confederate cavalry, and they fought them tooth and nail for a couple of hours out there, and actually bested them a couple of times. Finally, things got to the point where the Union had to get the heck out of there, because not only was the Confederates starting to hold their own a little better, but Confederate infantry started showing up. Cavalry's good, but in a stand-up fight, they can't really hold their own against infantry very well. So they had to go back across the river and do their thing. But that was what they consider the opening phase of the Union cavalry becoming of age. They did a very good job up through there, and all the way through Gettysburg campaign, they fought Jeb and his boys up and down all these little itty-bitty towns, railroad stations and places, and they bested them. In most places, they bested them. One of the last places, just before Gettysburg, was the Battle of Hanover. And they come roaring in there and Oak Hill Cavalry. Kilpatrick got his little bit of glory out of that. But they come running in and actually chase the Confederates out of Hanover. And soon after that was the Battle of Gettysburg, where the Union cavalry met Jeb Stuart and his boys on the 3rd and bested them. Jeb was supposed to come around behind the Union Army, and when Pickett was supposed to break through in the middle, and the Union started to break, the rebel cavalry was supposed to be there to make things hell for them, basically. But the Union Cav got in there and did a good job on the 3rd. Now, Mr. Ingersoll was not involved a lot on the 3rd, but where he was involved in Gettysburg was the day before on the 2nd. Banner's Ridge, I think it's called. Brenner's Ridge? Brinkerhoff, that's it, yeah. Okay, there's a couple of them. Banner Hill's over to the side. Anyway, the 10th New York was sent out as skirmishers and pickets to this front up toward the ridge to hold the position along the stone wall. And what happened was I believe the Confederate infantry got there a little bit ahead of them. And with, I said earlier, with the muskets, you had a longer range. So the Cavs started to fall back at it. They held their own, and they fell back to a good position and kept the Confederates from getting back into there until the next day when the big battle broke loose. Now, 63, the Union Cavalry's coming to age. It's got things going for it. By 64, well, there was a Dahlgren range in 63. I'll give you that one first. There was an officer by the name of Dahlgren. His father was in the Navy and had come up with the huge Dahlgren guns. I mean, these things were humongous things. The Navy used most of the time. Sometimes the Army had them in the forts. I mean, they had a war on them like this. But anyway, the son was on his way to become famous, wanted to be a glory hound. They made a raid on Richmond. Dahlgren didn't make it. Outside of Richmond, a couple of miles out, they got ambushed, and he paid the ultimate price. There's a special story about that if you ever get into it. There were some letters found on him supposedly, and the Confederates claimed that the raid was based just to get into Richmond and murder and kill women and children and everything else. But that is I won't say it's been proven to be propaganda, but it leads that way. 64, Grant moves south. He gets into the fight at the Wilderness. The Cav gets out ahead of him, and they're actually holding positions, trying to keep Lee from coming up as fast as he did. They did a good job for as long as they could. But the Cav, again, against infantry just isn't making it, so they had to come back out. After the Wilderness fight, Grant decides, instead of retreating like most of them do, he's going to continue south. So the cavalry has to run off towards Spotsylvania. This is where Sheridan, who everybody thought, still does to this day, was such a great hero. This was his first major foul-up that really gets recorded. He was supposed to be ahead of the infantry and was supposed to move in and secure Spotsylvania. He gets halfway there and decides to stop. The infantry comes up, they can't get past him. So by the time they get this cluster all straightened out, Lee's troops have moved in and occupied Spotsylvania. So now you have the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse and the section through there because Sheridan got playing around. This is also the time that General Meade and General Sheridan locked horns, and to settle the matter, Grant took Sheridan and gave him separate command with the cavalry. So now the cavalry is actually a separate entity from the infantry. Again, another major raid on Richmond. This time, in here you'll read a lot of it. These boys are out there for days, maybe weeks. They're steadily in the saddle. They ride all day, have to pull picket duty at night. The Confederate cavalry is hot on their tails. It's driving them nuts. There's no sleep, very little food. It runs out. The only way to get food is to try to rob it off the locals. Good old-fashioned foraging. This place has been foraged over for years. They're not getting a whole lot. There's some major battles fought. You've got Yellow Tavern. I mentioned the other one earlier, now I'm going to forget it.
Trevelyan. Trevelyan.
Yeah, Trevelyan Station. And There was one or two other big ones, but at Yellow Tavern, that's where Jeb Stewart finally bought the bullet. He got clobbered there. Excuse me. So they cannot get back to the Union lines the way they came in. The only way to go back out is to go down by Richmond and come back along the peninsula where McClellan had been. And that's how they get out. They come back out by the Pamunkey River, White House, and along the James, and from there, they actually get resupplied and rejoin, have to way back up and around, I think through Washington to actually get there, to get back with the Army again and get reorganized. So, the cavalry life, at least when I was always reading about it, everybody says how glorious it is. You're riding on all over the place, you're having a good time, you know. They got songs like that from the Confederate Cavalry, join the cavalry, have a good time, you know. And it sounds like this is the way you want to go. You get reading some of this stuff, and there's a lot of it in these diaries. These guys went through hell. There was times they'd be out there in the rain, in the slop, no tents, no nothing. Not only were the guys dropping because they were fatigued, but the horses, if you couldn't get the proper food to them, which a lot of times you couldn't, they were starving. And it was nothing to wear out horses. On one raid you might lose anywhere from 30 to 50 horses. And he mentions it here a couple of times that during these raids he had to walk back because the horse was gone. Either it died outright or best he could do was to lead it because it couldn't carry the weight. And then they'd have to go back to refit. All the guys with good horses would go back out, and the guys with worn out horses or no horses, they had a repo depot, as we used to call it. And you'd go back there and you have to wait until the Army secured all these horses, brought them in, and refit. And they'd get all their equipment, stuff back up again, and then they go right back out. And this was a continual thing. They probably lost, for every man lost in the Civil War, there was probably 5 to 10 horses. They just wore them out. They were constantly going. Even the mules, there was just, they could only push them so far, and if you couldn't get the supplies up to them, that's just the way it went. And I was surprised through some of this that you always see the cavalryman with his little roll on the back of his saddle, and you figure, okay, he's got his blanket in there, he's got his tent on there, he's all set. But I can't tell you how many times you're going to read in this book that they didn't have their tents with them. They had nothing. And they just stand there in the rain, or get under a tree, or just sit there. And the first part of the book will tell you, you get in there and the guy's describing, oh, I hate this, I hate that, you know, and other stuff. And then he gets talking about being out there in the rain and the slop and the junk. So the first year, 62 into 63, is basically a whiner, okay? He doesn't like this stuff. By late 63, 64, he's going through the same stuff, but now he turns around and says, it's the life of a soldier. You just get used to it, and you go on from there. And another thing I ran across in there, which reminds me so much when I was in the service, and some of you other fellows know the same thing. Yeah. He is always complaining. It's just a soldier's way of doing stuff. And you just, all the trials and tribulations these people went through, you can actually relate to. Like you said, sometimes it almost brings you to tears, some of the stuff these guys go through. And he mentions a couple of friends along the way that either died from disease or from wounds. Some of them just come up missing. One section that really got me, you don't read a lot about, this was in 63. Everybody's heard of Mosby's Rangers, the guerrillas. These guys were bloodthirsty bandits, basically, from what you really get into reading about. I mean, they glorified them as doing all this fantastic stuff and tearing up stuff. But these guys would sneak in at night on the pickets, and they wouldn't capture a picket. They'd Shanghai him, run him out, hang him someplace, slit his throat or whatever else, and just leave him out there. The idea was to terrorize the Union troopers so that they desert or whatever else, make it just as miserable as could be. And that surprised me because a couple of times he talks about losing 5 to 8 guys a night. They'd be out there on picket duty and they just wouldn't be there. And speaking of picket duty, there's another thing these guys, the cav was always used as vedettes or the first picket line. Behind that would be the infantry pickets. So these guys caught everything coming in at first. And a lot of times, he mentions in there that, and we've seen this with the infantry and everything else, you get out there and I tell you, 2 days from now, your relief will be here, you'll be all set, supplies are coming in. 5 days later, you're still standing out there going, why? You know, somebody forget me, what's going on? And this happens a lot to these guys. They get out there. So basically, what best I can tell you is a cavalryman's life was not a grand thing. It wasn't all the glory they made it out to be. You know, you see the grand charges across the field and the sabers flashing and stuff. They don't talk about those grand charges across the field and somebody's got artillery set up on the other side and you're catching all kinds of cane through that. Plus the fire coming in with the ambushes. And old George Custer in that movie, there was a Boots and Saddles or something, or what was it? They died with their boots on, that's what it was. It shows these glorious, come on my Wolverines, and they're going across the field of Gettysburg, right? And it shows these great clashes out there, and they come back, and you don't see anybody missing, you know, and they reform, and hey, we're going again. And yeah, they made several assaults like that, but those ranks kept getting thinner. I mean, a lot of these guys weren't coming back. And again, with the horses, to give you an idea of what it was like to go against infantry, my wife and I were just talking about it. During the Battle of Brandy Station, a lot of people don't know that there was actually infantry supports sent across with the cavalry. One of the regiments that we do our research on, the 86th New York, was one of those regiments. They were positioned in these woods. The Union cavalry went forward and made their assault. One of the regiments did, anyway, one or two. And they went up there and locked horns. Well, the Union cavalry notoriously back then would get their nose busted, fall back, and try to reform and do it again. So this is what happened. And when they fell back, the Confederate cavalry now was counterattacking. They're right on these guys. But boy, we're going to run them right into the river and have them. So they come riding across this open field toward this wood line. And lo and behold, the wood line's full of infantry. These guys come riding up, and the infantry just stood up and opened on them. One big volley. And from what the one guy describes, he says, after we fired, he says, we had horses without riders, and riders without horses, and anybody that could move was headed for the rear. And that's all what happened to you, especially in an ambush. I mean, you think you're doing great. You make a heck of a target on top of a horse. There you are. There's many places you can go. So, what I'm going to do now is try to answer any questions you have. I mean, that's the basics I can give you on cavalry. I mean, it's a moving arm of the military. Today, the cavalry is all mechanized. Tanks, Hummers, a little bit of everything. And these guys back then wish they had half of that equipment. But it's still a mobile force. It's a first strike force. It's a reconnaissance. Nothing, the basics haven't changed, it's just the equipment they have. Instead of horses, the first big thing from horses was tanks, when they did the armored divisions, but they were still called armored divisions, they weren't cav units. The next big step was Vietnam. Now they're in choppers, and they're flying in and out. No more horses, now they throw you on a chopper, and away you go. Same thing, you make a big target, making all kinds of noise coming through, and somebody's going to shoot you down. So, basically, that's all I can really give you without exaggerating and going on to stuff. So I think the best thing to do now, ask me questions on anything during the Civil War, not just the CAV. You'd be surprised how much I know and don't know. And like I said, I'm a good BSer, so you may never know the difference. No questions?
No, there'll be some questions. Give us a minute.
I'll be right there. Yes, ma'am.
I've heard, and I don't know how often this happened, that if a woman's husband died, that she would just marry his brother? Did that happen a lot? I mean,
That would happen to stay within the family and the support. I mean, most of this is a small town, like say Oxford, right?
Yeah.
You've only got so many people, right? And if he's out to combat getting clobbered, and he dies out there. And a woman back then very seldom did everything by herself. Usually the man took care of the family and the household. So if he dies, she has no income. Nothing really. There's a good chance she may even lose the farm or whatever else she's living on. So the only way to keep it would be to marry somebody. And if you could marry the brother, you're still in the same family, still the same farm, the same,
Don't have to
Set
change
up.
your name.
you know, so I'm not saying it didn't happen, but
And your kids still look like their dad.
that's right.
You don't have to remonogram the
Why do you
house.
think one family name carries so much to an area? Yes, ma'am.
So you always hear about the women and others that followed the soldiers in their army, whether it was officers or, yeah. So that was as a company or like if,
With the American Civil War, that seldom happened.
oh, okay.
One thing, the armies moved a lot more.
Mhm.
Women, they prefer not to have the women around camp because you have so many young, vigorous young men, you know, that are running around having a ball, and it would cause more trouble than it would good. There was no real place for the women in a camp. Sometimes the officers' wives would accompany them only so far. If they were in a permanent camp someplace, like when they first got to Washington DC and the training camps and stuff, yes, they would show up. Sometimes the whole family would come down, dad, mom, the wife, kids, whatever. Take a train down, visit for a day or two, and then go back up. But as far as camp followers go, like you think in the American Revolution and stuff, in the French and Indian Wars, where they actually carried the stuff on their backs and followed them into
Right,
the
right.
field, it didn't
It
happen.
didn't happen.
There were some women who dressed up and joined the military, either with their husbands or on their own or whatever. As soon as they were found out, they were thrown out of the camp area. Some of them wound up in insane asylums because they figured out any woman who dressed up as a man wasn't right in the head. So she went to an insane asylum. It did happen. A couple of cases you can find on both sides where someone would come up sick or wounded, and they put them on the operating table or whatever, strip them down and go, whoops, what's this? But again, it's very rare, very, very rare.
Was that a bad, unfair that General Hooker there was, left his name?
No, Hooker had his women show up at the camps, like, let's say, the camp of 62, 63, down by Stoneman Station, in Falmouth, in that area, right across from Fredericksburg. They stayed there after the Battle of Fredericksburg. And Hooker was known to have lady friends in and out. And Dan Sickles had a few of his own. And it wasn't that uncommon, especially when they had their big parties. Dan Sickles and the 3rd Corps were notorious, famous for their St. Patty's Day parties. I mean, they celebrated from sun up to sundown till maybe the next 2 days. They had horse races, they had drinking contests, they had, you name it, they were doing. Happened on the southern side too, don't think it did.
Okay, because you mentioned Sickles 2 or 3 times, and some people here may not be aware of
He's my
Sickles.
hero. Go ahead.
He's your hero?
Oh,
Well,
yes.
we could talk, because I'm not a Sickles person.
Okay, we can go. What do you want about Danny?
Well, I was just gonna say, you might say something a little more about him, but either that thing at, just the thing in the leg at Gettysburg, and just to introduce people to him, this guy was from a kid, pretty wild guy. And among other things, he had shot and killed in a pretty jealous rage, or
Francis
his wife's
Scott
lover,
Key's
and got
son.
away with it, got off. in New York
Francis
City.
Scott Key's
And,
son, this is just before the war, was seeing Danny Sickles' wife on the side. Dan found out about it. He did more than find out, he was investigating, and he found out that either his wife or Key there would throw a little handkerchief in the air or something, you know, and then they'd get together. So Danny waited and he confronted him. And push come to shove, words to word, and Danny shot him, killed him dead, right there in the middle of the street. Went to court. First time in history the defense of temporary insanity was used. Dan was a lawyer from New York City. He was a politician from New York City. He knew all the ins and outs. Danny won the case, claiming temporary insanity.
Wow.
What spoiled his reputation afterwards, he took his wife back. That was a no-no. You don't, I mean, she was foul, you know. He brought her back. Danny Sickles, after the war, was secretary, or not secretary, anyway, he represented the United States at the Queen of Spain, in Spain it was. When he was introduced in the court, he also introduced his mistress. That didn't go over too well. Danny didn't care. He was that kind of guy. He was straightforward, not only before the war, but after the war. Another story I'll tell you about Danny, which runs close to here, the Erie Railroad. Everybody knows the old Great Erie Railroad runs up and down through here. Erie Railroad never made a profit in its life. Not, and everybody got the money they should have. What was happening, a guy went to Danny after the war, and this guy who ran the railroad, he had this great big building in New York City. Well, he wasn't sharing the profits. It wasn't getting down to the shareholders and stuff. The money was just going. Well, this guy had a bunch of thugs that protect him in this building. So this guy came to Danny and he says, what are we going to do? He says, you leave this to me. Don't say a word to anybody. Don't do anything. He says, it's going to take some time, but I'll straighten this out. Well, I forget how long it took, but Danny went and hired his own thugs. They busted into the building, ran upstairs. The guy barricaded himself in the room. Danny and the boys kicked in the door, threw the guy out, and took over the railroad and gave it back to the stockholders. But
He was doing this on one leg, too.
yes, at that time on one leg.
And there are people in this room, if you took a survey, there are probably people in this room who walked by one of his legs and not realized it. So you want to just tell them about that?
Is it the Smithsonian?
Yeah.
It's in one of the Smithsonian
Tell them
buildings.
about that.
The Battle of Gettysburg. We can go into, that's another discussion.
I know.
But at the Battle of Gettysburg, down by the Trossel farm, Sickles had his headquarters. When the lines started to break, the Confederate artillery moved up a little bit closer, almost into the peach orchard at that time, and they were firing into the Trossel farm area. Danny was on his horse. I think it's his right leg. I can't remember. Cannon shot hit his leg, through the leg into the horse. So the only thing that was holding his leg was a couple of tendons, and he's down on the ground. So to give you an idea of the character of this guy, I love him. I don't care. This guy is just crazy, and I love him for it. He looks around and he figures the boys are going to see me down, and they're going to just panic. Things are going to go crazy. He says, no problem. So they pick him up on the stretcher. He's like his leg is just hanging there. He reaches over to his buddy, grabs a handful of cigars, sits up on the stretcher, lights the cigar, and he's waving to the troops as they're carrying him off. Oh, hang in there, boys, we'll get him yet! And he's going right on down through, and right off the battlefield to the hospital. Now, if we got the time, I'll chew into this.
So anyway, he did have his leg preserved.
His leg is preserved.
Yeah.
They cut it off, and he kept it, and they took it down to the Smithsonian Institute, and it still sits there. I think the cannonball is still sitting there. It's
Yes,
about a
they're
3-inch
both,
ball. It's still sitting there.
Were they mummified?
How did they skip?
No, the skeleton, it's just the skeleton of the leg.
Oh.
Yeah. One thing is mummified down there, I think, is Roy Rogers' horse. Trigger, is still down there mummified. Oh yeah, and General Sheridan's horse is down there mummified. Yep.
By the way, I just so you know, I was standing for Sheridan a little bit too. You know, I'm a New Yorker. He was a New Yorker, and And,
I can tell you some stories on him too. that
oh,
you-
everybody can, but, so, you know, pound for pound, quite a guy.
Yes, yeah. I'm gonna tell you one thing more about Danny, because everybody damns Dan for the Battle of Gettysburg. And here's where we're gonna get this. I've talked to Rangers, I've talked to everybody else, and this goes back and forth all over the place. At the Battle of Chancellorsville, in May of '63, Sickles finally gets permission when Jackson is going to make his sweep. He sees Jackson making the maneuver down by Catherine Furnace. And he's begging Hooker, let me go down there and hit him. Well, Hooker, so finally he says, okay, see what you can do. So by the time Danny gets permission to go, he hits the rear end of Jackson's column. So it doesn't do a whole lot. But Danny's still fighting down there. And there's a hill he came off of, it's called Hazlett's Grove. It's a high ground down there. It overlooks most of the battlefield of Chancellorsville. The 3rd Corps held that position. They gave up part of it to go down there and hit Jackson. So now while they're down there, Jackson makes his famous flank attack. 3rd Corps, parts of it are now down at Catherine's Furnace. So they have to come back through these swamps and hills to get back up on Hazlett's Grove. They are there during Jackson's counterattack. They hold off Jackson in that area. They actually sent the cavalry, goes charging in there against infantry, gets itself mangled, but it blew the Confederate attack all to pieces in that one area because it was getting dark, and here's people coming out of the woods at them with horses, you know, like, what in the world? That's how Jackson got killed, because the Confederates thought it was more cav coming in. And Jackson was on his horse, and they shot him, thinking it was Union cav. So anyway, this hill should, for all reasons, be held. And Sickles is telling them, keep this hill because it controls the high ground. We can, you know, get a good range up here. Hooker decides no. He tells him, get out of there, come back over, and we'll reform the line up along the plank road stuff. Reluctantly, Dan says, gotta follow orders, so he backs out of there. What happened was the Confederates moved up on that hill, and they could shell the entire Union position from there. And they did. And that's one of the major reasons why the Union Army lost the Battle of Chancellorsville. Sickles never forgot this. He's at Gettysburg. Gets there the evening of the 1st. Sets up down by the Weichert House, if you guys know where that's at. It's about halfway between Little Round Top and the high water mark. So he's up in the low ground in that area. In the morning, Meade sends a courier over. He says, I want you to occupy from the 2nd Corps all the way down to where Gary's 12th Corps Brigade sat. Well, that's cool. But 2 things. One, to this day, nobody knows exactly where Gary's brigade was. They don't. They got a general idea. Everybody will tell you today it was on Little Round Top. It wasn't. Even those who don't have a good idea where it was forward a Little Round Top and to the right, down on the lowlands. So Danny looks this over, and he's going over it and going over it, and where they've got him, according to orders, he's in that swampy swell down in there. There's no place for artillery. You can't put anything in there, and the woods are close enough where the Confederates can come out of those woods are on top of you before you can do anything. He sends couriers to Meade. Come look at my position. This is terrible. I got to do something about this. Meade don't want to hear it. He's busy over at Culp's Hill looking around because he wants to make an attack off through there. So Danny rides out. Well, he doesn't ride out at first. He sends the 3rd Maine and the 1st U.S. Sharpshooters, and they go out past through the fields over to what's called Pitcher's Woods today. They make contact with the Confederates, who now are moving down the line to move over in front of the Round Top area to make their attack. Well, these guys butt them, delay Lee's move. Lee looks out. By this time, Danny has also moved artillery up to the Peach Orchard. And maybe a brigade of infantry, but no more. This is just like a little probe out there. And he's still going back to Meade, and he's saying, listen, let me come up. I got better ground up here. It's high ground. I can set up artillery all over the place. I got a ridge here and a ridge here. I can protect the Emmitsburg Road. That's the road we used to come in on. Let me have this. Meade won't make a decision. He's doing something else, so he keeps sending other people. So finally, Danny says, send me General Hunt. So General Hunt comes down, the artillery. And Danny shows him the position. And Hunt says, I agree. He says, you've got great artillery positions. But I don't know if you can hold this line. He says, I'm not going to say yes or no. He says, I haven't got the authority. So now the word goes back to me again. So finally Danny says about 12 o'clock, he says, you know what? So he moves forward. Up to the spot that everybody says, oh my God, you can never hold that position. He got in position, Hunt gets back to Meade, they talk it over, and he sends orders for Sickles to show back up to headquarters, finally, right? So Danny rides up. Meade says, you can't be there, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And about that time, the guns open up. Now it's about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the guns are open up. So Meade says, never mind, you've got to hold it now, I'll send the 5th Corps as reinforcements. He was slow in getting in there. Danny was promised the 5th Corps to move up, because Danny has, at that time, has one of these smallest corps in the Army of the Potomac. He lost the whole division at the Chancellorsville, not from casualties. Their enlistments were up. He says, I'm going home. And there they go. Yeah, so there's a whole division missing. So he's holding his line. 5th Corps is slowly moving up. They get there about the time that the Devil's Den is already under attack. And it's starting to get a little shaky in there. So the thing that it breaks down to the argument, one, did Dan refuse orders or go against orders? In my book, he did not, because they never came down and specified. They never did, to judge his position. 2, he was promised the 5th Corps. It came up late, but it did get there, and they did hold the reserve position, the round tops, and back in through there. Now, here's one to get you. 3rd Corps is out there holding their line. It took the 5th Corps and the 6th Corps and part of the 2nd Corps to finally support that line that Danny had in the first place. And he gave, a lot of people say they were overrun. Those boys fought. I mean, they fought tooth and nail out there before they finally broke. Peach Orchard was the first place to go. Devil's Den was the first place hit, but it was one of the last positions to fall. Wheatfield, right next to Devil's Den, is going back and forth. It was a hell of a mess in there. The Peach Orchard area finally collapsed, and the Union troops were moved almost all the way back to Cemetery Ridge. 2nd Corps is sending troops up trying to reinforce areas. They wind up in the Peach Orchard, or not the Peach Orchard, in the Wheatfield, and down along Plum Run, just below Cemetery Ridge. Now, a lot of the books will tell you the 3rd Corps broke and was just gone. Didn't happen that way. Parts of them did, yes. 2 sections fought like dogs. Devil's Den held out for almost 2 hours, and they were told they would be relieved by the 5th Corps. 5th Corps troops started to show up. Ward's brigade holding the Den area. He's all but out of ammunition. He's getting flanked. He says, okay boys, we're going back to where we started. So they pull out. They did not break and run. They pulled out and went up. The Confederates fight their way up to the top of Hawks Ridge, the Devil's Den area. There they meet the parts of the 5th Corps. 5th Corps gets its nose busted, the regulars. Gets their nose busted, bang, they're back up toward the round tops. Pennsylvania Reserve comes back down, good old boys from Pennsylvania, and they push the Plum Run area clear into the middle of the wheat field and then fall back. So Danny delayed, he messed up Lee's entire attack plan by moving out there. Lee thought, when he first set it up, he saw the Union troops at the Peach Orchard. He thinks this is the flank, the entire left flank of the Union Army. So he sets up with Hood clear down the other side. And what they're gonna do is work in echelon. Hood is supposed to move forward and then pivot and follow the Emmitsburg Road up toward the Peach Orchard. And these other brigades and divisions are gonna come in the same way and do the same thing, and thus hit the Union line in the rear and in the flank and roll it up. Time they get there, they don't see the rest of Danny's corps sitting there. Hood starts out, and here's Ward's brigade with artillery up on Hawks Ridge. He starts shelling them. The skirmish line's forward. They start mangling Hood's boys. He's already gone to Longstreet, who went back to Lee and says, listen, you gotta let me go around. I can't go forward. This is crazy. Not with the original plan, because they'd have been in the flank. The Union troops are just shooting right into the sides of them. So Lee says, go, that's it. So they go forward. They can't follow the original plans because of the Union troops being where they are. So now they got to swing. And now they're going after Devil's Den and the Round Tops instead of the Peach Orchard. The whole Confederate line gets messed up. They make their attack.
Doug, I'm going to interrupt you.
Yes.
I just want to say, you people you catch on with a guy like this when they get going.
Yes, I'm sorry.
You know,
To make the story
he
short.
knows the outfit and the commanders and the incidents and the timing. And you get in there, and people like me that think they know something about it realize I didn't know what the hell was going on. just like the people who were there. And but I want to point out that map over there. That's one of 3 maps we have in our little museum of the Battle of Gettysburg. First day, second day, third day. That one is day 2. And once we sort of break out, I'm going to set that up so people get a look at it. And people who heard about this peach orchard or something, want to get a closer look. So your hand is actually on the peach orchard instead of just waving in the air. That'd be great. So,
I'll cut it short. What actually happened was because of Sickles' position, he mangled the Confederate attack. It busted it up. So now the other corps could come in. So Longstreet's attack was gone. And there was no further they could get. And that's another reason why Lee decided to pick his charge up the middle,
yeah.
because of what had happened.
But
as much as you may
admit that this is still controversial, though? That
Oh, it's always
okay.
controversial.
Okay.
I've sat down with people for days. Sickles did this wrong, he did that wrong, he did blah, 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 blah. I don't agree with you.
I taught U.S. history for a number of years, and I had an uncle who fought in World War I. Several family members fought in World War II, and at least a dozen of my students fight in Vietnam. And I've never heard one of them approach the war with this lighthearted, humorous approach. It certainly wasn't because the Civil War was like
No, it was
600,000 people, the bloodiest war in human history, certainly the most bloody war in our history, including World War II. Is it the distance, or is there something about the war that allows us to approach it with such humor and lightheartedness?
I think one is the distance. The other is all the research. Another part of it, I think, is because it was American against American, and both sides can relate so much to it, that you can see what happened, and you can joke about the mistakes and stuff today. You can read the diaries and the letters of the time period, and you can get the emotions of those who are actually there. And some of them, it's like the old saying, either I laugh or I cry. So they laugh at it. I think part of this is the discussion you get into it too, where today you can talk about it. I mean, I can talk to my fellow veterans. I went to Germany. I didn't go to Nam. I was real lucky. But I've sat down with the guys that were in Nam a lot of times, good neighbors, good friends and stuff. And there are times you can talk about stuff, you'll fall out of your chair laughing because you can relate to it. Even though it made a major foul-up, but because of how it happened, and maybe the guy next to you did some crazy, stupid thing, that it's just completely out of context. And I think it's also a way of coping with the whole idea.
You think we'll be able to talk this way about Vietnam?
Some guys already do.
In 20, 30 years?
But the
Laugh about
veterans,
it and-
the veterans can today, to an extent, because they can relate to each other. And they were at the same places, or maybe not the exact same time, but they were in the same towns, the same areas, and they can relate to this stuff. And it's stupid little things that the common day, everyday type routines you go through. Now, you get into a really combat situation where they lost a buddy next to them or something like that, no. No, there's no really joking about that. But I think it's also a coping mechanism within the human soul, spirit, whatever you want to say. This is how you can relate to that and still draw yourself out without becoming part of it. Because you talk the Civil War, you get into the diaries, you get into the personal letters, the battle descriptions that are written right then and there afterwards, and you can't help but feel the emotion. And I think,
Well, we saw that up at Fort Drum with that young troop that brought the videos out. Remember that night?
oh, yes. This guy, we were up to Fort Drum for the 100 and some anniversary of the U.S. Army or whatever it was, and they had all these time periods. So there was a guy there, a young soldier, I think he was a sergeant, I can't remember, just came back from Afghanistan. And he actually had videos of some of the combat situations. And he's laughing his head off. I mean, here's this guy's face plastered to the front windshield of his Humvee. And he's laughing about it. Yeah, this guy, we got him. One of these, well, the guy was what? One of these suicide bombers. And when the guy blew up, his face came forward and was plastered right on the windshield of the Jeep. And he says, funniest thing you ever saw. He just went out, scraped it off, and washed the windshield where I'm on. It's, you know, within him, he's probably screaming someplace. All these memories coming back.
Yeah.
But this is the way you coped with it. It's a self-defense mechanism. But yes, there's going to be.
I think that was an excellent question, and I think you've answered it as well as it could be answered.
Okay, I'll
Yeah,
stop.
really, no, don't go away. I just want to mention that you read this diary, you read other diaries of different wars and so on, and you encounter this, and you also see some of the same things from Caesar's army to Marlborough's army to our Civil War, some of the same things that the ordinary guy comes, and some of the same attitudes I was an enlisted man and will always be an enlisted man.
Oh, yeah.
And that they have.
That's my officer.
Oh, okay. And, and the things that come up in this Ingersoll's book, you'll see in other areas. One little thing I want to mention is I just saw the thing about is that Hurtgen Forest? How do you say that?
Hurtgen Forest.
The Hurtgen Forest, and that Ingersoll mentions it several times. Is a clue for them that something was coming up was when they would get some good food. Or they give us some good food and a couple of here, boys, have a couple of extra days rations. And the same thing was happening in World War II.
Oh, yeah.
These guys are eating, they'd come out of the line and they'd think they'd have a time up and
Well, you were
the
there. What?
lieutenant tells them, says, no, we're going back in. The guys, no, we just got to, no, we don't get a meal like this and extra cigarettes unless they're sending us back.
Yeah,
And
well,
sure enough, the next day.
New Jeeps show up,
Yeah.
repairs for your munitions and stuff, new equipment, and I saw that in Germany. They sent a company water purification outfit to Israel when the Middle East stuff was kicking back and forth.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we got brand new personnel carriers, all updated,
Yeah.
new equipment for this. We were looking at each other going, oh man.
Yeah. It's the same thing, exactly the same thing. One last question for the floor before we.
Might be a longer question you want to hear about, but you ever hear about a place called Millboro, Virginia?
What was it?
Millboro, Virginia.
I think I have.
Well, you're unusual then, because Millboro had been a site, apparently a Confederate site for training and for stockpiling of goods and so forth during the Civil War. They had a horse training facility up there. And in fact, it was so secret that Millboro never got discovered during the war and never got raided. And I guess their supplies got sent and taken where it's supposed to be. And I guess the war came to an end and the thing kind of died down. Well, the secret kind of came out probably around 1975 or so by people in California doing psychic research who knew about the people and the events and the places in Millboro, Virginia, although they were born and raised in California. They were never in Virginia. Well, we were in the area several years ago, and just for the fun of it, I thought we'd try to find Millboro and see what's there. I mean, it's obscure, it's back in nowhere. Most maps don't show you Millboro. So we rode around some side roads there. It's west of Danville, Roanoke out there in the mountains.
yeah.
Way out there, these little sharp valleys and in nowhere land. And we looked around, couldn't find Millboro. We asked questions, couldn't find Millboro. I stopped in one small town down there. I asked the postmaster, ever hear of a place called Millboro? Nah, never heard of it. So I got back in the car and took a ride. Millboro was the very next town where that guy was, and he hadn't heard about it. So anyhow, it wasn't discovered except for the psychic research in California by people who were born and raised in California, never in Virginia in their lives. But they
Makes
tell
you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Did they still have supplies?
Well,
Doug,
the
Doug, you've done a great job. We can listen to you for hours. Don't take it personally.
No.
How much is the book?
Oh, yeah,
And the
sell your
miners.
book.
I'm sorry I don't have one to hold up here, but I think we're going to it. Okay. You can see, this is Ingersoll here, Theodore Ingersoll, clever guy. And I can't possibly give a synopsis of the book. I can't possibly convince you how you would appreciate reading it if you did read it. But you'll find, for example, the soldier's life is so typical then as it is today. It's rough. It's very often what he says in here is what I've heard from fellows from World War II, that they never again in their life had such high experiences as that. Everything after that was coming down from those experiences. And this guy says the same thing during the war. He could not have said those things when he was in Elmira, the first few days, wow, this is great. But he could say those things, toward the end of the war.
Everybody usually who has survived something like that, they'll tell you, you're living on the edge.
Yeah.
You'll never feel so alive in your life as you will in certain moments.
It's almost as if he discovers those things on his own in here, and here it is true in war after war. And I'm not selling war. I ended up without getting a scratch about where he did. There's got to be some other way to settle these things. And I'm an anti-war person. And this book, by the way, is $22. $22 or $20 with a membership. You save $2. If you bought, what, 10 memberships? The book would be free. See, that's humor coming out of the war.
There you go.
At any rate, these will be on sale for years, and we'll have them wherever the Historical Society is, on the park, at the alumni thing, or at the programs. We'll have this for sale, and sooner or later you'll have one in your home. You should, if you're from Oxford, sooner or later you should read this book. It's well done, and it was a tremendous job of getting it transcribed, of figuring out what he said in some cases. And I'll tell you, there's some things in here that are not exactly PC. Capiche? But we couldn't change it. We can't change history, but we wrote it as he said.
Did you ever have to translate things? Like, there must have been expressions that they used.
Yes, in fact, he does a very good, Bill did a very good job of picking out things that toward the end of the book. There's a list here of expressions that were picked up from the Confederates.
Okay, but you tell them you tell us what it means. Like, Bob's your uncle. What the heck does that mean?
You mean like a vision to go by?
Yeah. What does that mean?
That is a bit of a problem, but we use it exactly as he said it and to try to explain anything. But there is some interpretation necessary because
You start seeing acronyms like OK.
Our language is constantly changing. Right? So, Listen, I wanna break this up. I wanna thank this guy Doug, but he's gonna stick around. And, that map up there, if someone want to look at that, have some food, buy one of our, that's what's $50. It's a great throw over there. You'll be buying one of those too, if you went to Oxford Academy, you know, you'll buy one of those sooner or later.